We'll give folks a few minutes here. All right, I think everybody's in that we're expecting. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marcus Hanscom. I'm the Director of Graduate Admission at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. We're finally seeing sun for the first time in 4 days, so we're feeling better today. But thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is through our partnership with the Wilbanks Consulting Group. Holly Wilbanks, who's the principal, will be speaking in just a second. And she's one of us, or was one of us, and certainly is a great partner with us, and certainly can provide a lot of great information related to graduate enrollment, and particularly the other side when students are heading out into their careers. So appreciate her being here. If you have any questions, please ask them in the questions box. We'll be happy to get to them at the end. We should have enough time to do that. We're also going to be recording this session, and the recording will be available publicly. So our organic webinars that we do are traditionally behind the exchange wall as a member benefit, but these vendor webinars are available more publicly. And I think particularly for this topic, I think you'll find there's a great opportunity to share this content with folks on your campus that might have some more direct influence maybe on the job search process for students, but also certainly there's some great resources for us and throughout the life cycle. So without kind of belaboring this any further, I want to pass it over to Holly Wilbanks. She is the principal of Wilbanks Consulting Group and formerly was the president of BioGap and worked at Baylor, so she can probably tell you a little bit more about that. I know you probably caught her in our previous webinar. So thanks again, Holly, for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcus, for having me. Really appreciate it. And so I'll just do a quick introduction for those who don't know me. As Marcus said, my background is in GEM. Specifically, I worked for Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, in their graduate school of biomedical sciences. And it was there that I kind of saw that as a former recruiter, someone who had worked in-house and agency and then kind of switched to the higher ed side, I saw for the first time what kind of disconnect there can be without, throughout that GEM life cycle, from the time that you're initially trying to attract a student into your graduate programs, all the way through enrollment, development, curriculum, and then, of course, when they actually graduate and hopefully secure employment and go off and become a wonderful outcome for you and your program. So very familiar with a lot of the strengths within different graduate schools and different programs and what they have to offer. Also very familiar with, like I said, a lot of the disconnects and gaps that can occur. And interestingly enough, started my business a little over 6 years ago in Houston. We now have an office in Pittsburgh, but we serve clients all over the US. And we do see a lot of students coming up on graduation, specifically graduate students reaching out to us saying, hey, I'm getting ready to hit the market. I need to be prepared. Can you do everything from my job search strategy and helping me figure out my transferable skills to literally do my resume or my CV and my LinkedIn profile, and how do I network, and all of the things that some of your schools and career development centers or professionals do very, very well, and others know that there is a definite need for. You may just not have those resources in place for whatever reason. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is telling you a little bit about how you can prepare your graduate students for highly competitive job markets. We're just coming out of a pandemic, probably one of the most interesting and unique job markets that we've ever seen. Some areas were, on fire, you couldn't hire enough people, while other areas had laid everyone else off. So really saw the spectrum and the gamut there. But a lot of trends have emerged. Having come out of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of shifts lately in the market. So we'll be telling you a little bit about what my team and I have seen kind of in the past few months and what we anticipate going forward. And then, of course, how you can best support your students to prepare for the current and future markets like this as well. So what we're hearing in the market is that there is a definite increase in hiring. I know that hourly wage workers particularly in retail and things like that, hospitality, that is an area that you're seeing on the news right now. People just can't hire people for, and that is correct. We are seeing that as well. A lot of people our employers are really struggling to find that talent. But what we're not seeing, and more than likely, your graduate students are not applying for those opportunities. They're applying for what we would call, salaried positions that have benefits and things like that. Those positions are actually really ramping up and heating up within the market right now. Basically, what happened was in the pandemic, a lot of companies and industries overall pretty much put hiring freezes in place. They really only went and backfilled a position if it was an absolute necessity to backfill that position. And because of that, there seems to be a lot of pent-up demand. So a lot of positions were not filled even if somebody left. And at this point, we are now seeing employers kind of lift those hiring freezes and say, we're coming out of this mess now. Things are going to be okay again. We know where we stand financially and in terms of the work that we have to do, and therefore we can hire these people back into these positions again. So with that in mind, there has been a huge ramp up in hiring recently. We've had 3 clients alone in the past week get jobs, all in different industries, different levels. So it's something definitely to keep an eye on, and it's a great time for your graduate students who are in the market or who are entering the market to be in the market. We also see a lot of companies that had put new initiatives on hold, starting to roll out the okay for those initiatives as well, which is really nice, not only for your graduate students who are coming out of your graduate programs, but it's also really nice for some of your alumni who are maybe in leadership positions, mid to senior level managers. Those positions we've seen an uptick in hiring for recently as well. So when you think about today's presentation, don't just think about your current crop of students, think of your alumni. Also think about those students that you are going to be recruiting into your programs as well. What can you do with this knowledge of the market in order to attract them to your programs? You can share this information with them, show that you're on the pulse of what's happening in the employment market, even before they come into your programs, so that they know that you're going to bring sort of that quality and that expertise to them as they go through their graduate degree. The other big thing that we've seen is the uptick in remote options. So this concept of hybrid working, sometimes being in the office, sometimes being from home or wherever, that is not going to go away for a lot of organizations. And so I think right now, most people are kind of not necessarily changing jobs because of that, but I think it is at the top of mind from at least a lot of the candidates that we're working with. And it's about a 60-40 split, maybe. 60% of people are saying we really, really want remote working. We want that option. It doesn't have to be all the time, but about 40% are saying we don't mind being in an office, or we really like being in an office and we want that. So that's what we're seeing from our angle. In terms of supporting your students in gaining employment regarding remote work, I would just make sure that you help them understand that there are advantages to both the remote piece and the in-office piece. And then, of course, helping them understand what the search parameters are that they should be using to look for remote work opportunities. The simple fact that if they are looking at positions that are remote only, meaning that the position is completely remote, then they can open that up to other states. They don't have to just look at the city and state where they currently reside. They can look at things all the way across the country or in a completely different city and state, which will really open up the job prospects for them as well. Okay. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, you are welcome to type them into the chat box or the Q&A feature. I am used to looking at those and happy to answer those along the way. But we will definitely have time at the end for a Q&A as well. So there are some bright spots in what we're seeing a lot of graduate schools do to prepare their graduate students for the employment market. The first one is, we've seen, particularly in light of the pandemic, a ramp up in we would call virtual support. So what we saw pre-pandemic was a lot of graduate schools would make students literally physically come in and sit down at a desk with somebody to get the career support that they needed to go on and be successful. And what we're seeing now is, everybody's used to Zoom. People have realized they can coach via Zoom. They can review resumes and CVs and LinkedIn profiles via Zoom. They can interview prep via Zoom. So I think the graduate schools have done a really nice job of coming around and pivoting a lot of that content to a virtual option for their students. We've also seen an uptick in what I would call specialized career development centers or specialized career development professionals. And this is not necessarily a specific result of the pandemic. This is more of a trend that we've seen coming together within about the past 10 years. But a lot of times we see graduate schools now offering specific career development in computer sciences or biomed, or a lot of the technical areas where, a lot of times historically, those particularly in the STEM fields felt that when they would go to a university career development center, once they got to the graduate level in their specialized STEM field, it wasn't necessarily going to be as bespoke or as tailored of a service as they needed for them to be as successful in their search. So a lot of the schools offering these more specialized career development centers within specific schools, or at least an individual who specializes in that school and speaking that language, knowing the market, that has been an advantage that we've seen a lot of schools embrace, and we would actually encourage them to continue to do and move in that direction. And then, of course, expanded employer relations. I think that has always been a focus to an extent, and it's certainly something that you can be selling sort of on the front end during the admissions process too, if that's something that you feel like your graduate school does very well. Both that, and if you have a specialized career development center, definitely sell that on the front end during the admissions process as well, okay? The employer relationships are a double-edged sword. They're great because you have these established relationships where you get to know more of the employer and what it is that they're hiring for. But then it's like your students still have to fit that mold of that employer or that group of employers to be able to go there. So there's that double edge there that we'll talk about in a second on the development opportunity side as well. So just keep in mind that all of these are great selling points. If you're not familiar with how your career development center or professional, whatever you have in place at your school actually does the virtual support, works on the employer side. Do they have specialized professionals in your different areas, or are they an umbrella career development center? Know that information so that when you're talking to recruits and potentially selling that as a reason to come to your graduate program versus another one, you can really confidently talk about all of that, because I will tell you that the students definitely have, what are you going to do to support me so that I can get a job and, actually get something out of this degree and not just get a degree, right? We always have all of the typical selling points of, degrees are great because a lot of times nowadays they are a requirement for advancement or for more senior level positions. And that is still absolutely true. And we are actually seeing a lot of employers embracing more of those instead of just having it as a would be nice or preferred requirement. It is a legit requirement now to have those advanced degrees for certain opportunities. But for situations where that may not be the case, being able to talk about how from the time they walk through the door to the time that they secure that new role, you have a partnership and collaboration kind of approach for them to make sure that they're prepared for the market, I think is a great, great selling point. So this is where we see our graduate programs coming up a little bit short, particularly at the school level. I like to say that I feel like career development and career preparation within graduate schools is very much like home builders. And I think of career development centers almost being like a Ryan Homes. So if you're familiar with Ryan Homes has kind of like been around forever, right? And they've been building homes, which people need forever. And yet they have adapted over time so that they're still selling homes that people want to buy even today. And I don't know that all career development centers and all graduate schools in their support of graduate students in their career development are doing as good of a job as Ryan Homes has done adapting over time, right? So when you think of Ryan Homes, you think of the fact that a long time ago, they stopped putting carpet in the bathrooms, okay? And you think of carpet in the bathrooms being something from like the 1970s, I think it was. And yet we see resumes come to our desk all the time that to us feel like carpet in the bathroom. And it literally, it just follows this very standard template. It's in Times New Roman font when it doesn't have to be. And little things like that immediately address a recruiter or a hiring manager as carpet in the bathroom, right? They're getting that same feeling instead of fresh, innovative, new thinking, all of that, which is what people want to hire, right? So we really want to help you stop putting carpet in the bathroom. And instead, we want to help you pivot quickly as things evolve within the market, right? So probably very recently, Ryan Homes stopped painting their walls on their interior gray and they started painting them white. Why? Because the trend is now suddenly white. Nobody wants gray walls anymore, even though for the past however many years, we all watched HGTV and insisted we all had to have gray walls, okay? So when the trends within the employment market can pivot just as quickly, are you pivoting and adapting so that your students can come across and be marketable and sell themselves effectively against the competition within the market? That is what we want to help you do. So one of the first things that we do recognize is that support of career development within graduate schools is typically highly underutilized by the students themselves, okay? So I'm going to recognize that right away. A lot of them, I think, don't realize how much value you all have to offer, whether it be within a specific career development center or just within some of the career development programs that you may roll out to students through the greater graduate school or through their specific program. So trying to get them to understand the value of tapping into what it is that you offer can often be a challenge, and I do want to acknowledge that. With that said, we have seen this challenge be even greater for schools that do not have a specialized career development center or do not have a specific person focused on specialized career tracks or paths or very technical areas as well. So as you kind of strategically look at how can we do better, what can we be doing differently going forward, it's going to be probably, if you don't already have some of those specialized people in place, trying to bring more of those people in. And that may originally be through your alumni. So you may not be able to hire a specific career development professional. You may not have a budget for that. But what you could do is, tap one or two alumni who are hiring managers in their current role and ask them to come and do 1 or 2 presentations a semester on what do they do in their hiring process, what do they look for, what do they hear from colleagues in the field, what should people be doing, not doing, and all of that. That would be a great way to bring in that more specialized technical expertise without feeling like you need to magically create a budget, okay? Getting rid of cookie cutter approaches too. I think that there is no such thing as a one size fits all template. And we even use templates in my business, right? Like there's no way we could create from scratch every person's resume every single time. That just wouldn't be cost effective. It wouldn't be a good business model, right? So we do use templates, but I am constantly reminding my consultants, this is a template. It is meant to be agile. It is meant to be adapted and used for the needs of each individual client, right? So in some templates, we may have content that takes up 2 lines, and then on a different template for a different client, it may only need to take up 1 line of information, right? It just depends on how it works best for each individual client. So careful with cookie cutter practices. Again, that leads to this perception, again, that you're still putting the carpet in the bathroom, you're just recycling it in a new model of a home, and therefore students start to think that there isn't value there for them to tap into. Evergreen best practices. There are a lot of best practices, but we're seeing, in recent years that a lot of those tried and true best practices are going out the window, right? So be aware of what best practices are still relevant and what best practices can you tell your students it's okay to quote unquote break the rules here. And I'm going to give you one of our best secrets for that in a minute with CVs. In terms of Lone Rangers, we do see a lot of graduate students kind of having analysis paralysis. They kind of just literally freeze and they think that they have to go at this process alone, all right? So I really do think that this starts with our admissions professionals and our recruiters and educating students before they even come into the school on what can we do to help you with career development. And no, you should not be doing this alone. You should be engaging people. Here are the specific people that you should be engaging. I know within the biomedical sciences, they eventually put IDPs into place, individual development plans. Those can be great in making sure that multiple people are touching that student's career development process, not just what's happening on the curriculum side. Understanding what works today. So making sure, I give you major kudos for attending today's presentation, but making sure that you continue to attend other presentations on graduate student development, the employment market, things like that, so that you are on the pulse of what's happening, or the people who need to be responsible for that are on the pulse of what's happening. Leveraging digital is a big one. So again, going back to the Ryan Holmes analogy, nobody nowadays goes to an open house unless they've already done the virtual tour online, right? So if you're not even going to go to an open house without a virtual tour, why would somebody invite your graduate student to an interview process, AKA the open house, if they haven't had a virtual tour yet? Okay, so you need to be helping your students create virtual tours of their experience for these recruiters and hiring managers. And the easiest way to do that is through a portfolio. So what we have found is a major market differentiator for our candidates is to create digital portfolios that they can use. They can link to them on their LinkedIn profile. They can link to them on their resumes and CVs, and then they can use them as talking points throughout an interview situation. Game changer and automatic differentiator. We have an entire webinar that we do on that. It's also an in-person workshop that we can do. So if that's something that your school has no experience with, we would be happy to help with alumni relations, that marriage between graduate school and alumni relations, that is a relationship unto itself, and that itself is underutilized as well. So if you aren't engaged with your alumni team, and a lot of alumni offices have specific alumni career development now too, right? They may have a person in charge of that, or that may be its own little office to itself, right? Your graduate school and your graduate programs should be collaborating with them all the time, okay? Because the reality is that can be a pipeline for opportunities. It can also be a window to the outside world for you and your students on what is happening and how can you best prepare these people. So make sure those alumni relations are engaged and they're strong and they're active in the actual events that you are doing for your students. Events can be everything from, we're doing a resume review where we're inviting, 15 alumni to come in and review resumes for 30 different students, sign up here, that kind of thing, to interview preparation. It can be networking. It can just be presentations that alumni do, kind of like what I talked about earlier. There's so many different options to engage alumni, and alumni love it when you're like, can you do, this Thursday for 1 hour, once a quarter, and then they can put that on their LinkedIn profile that they're part of the alumni career development programs or something, right? So it's a resume builder for them too. Early engagement is key, and I've kind of tapped on that multiple times. Like this whole career development concept and supporting these students and gaining employment, it has to start from the time that they're a lead or a prospect for your school, and it needs to carry all the way through their student experience and that student life cycle to the time that they graduate, and then maintain that engagement once they become alumni. Don't let them just get a job and go off and forget about you. Sign them up for that Thursday for 1 hour to come back and talk about how they did their job search and what worked and what didn't work, and advice that they would offer and questions that they can answer. That's a great way to kind of like keep them roped in. And then, of course, external collaborators. We have seen an uptick in graduate schools engaging external collaborators, which we certainly like because we are those external collaborators, and that's job security for us. But I think more importantly, the reason they do it is to bring in different perspectives. And a lot of times it's really interesting. We're saying the same things that you say, but we're saying it in a different way, or because it's coming from a third-party source or from an outside expert, suddenly students are more engaged and they want to listen to the information. And I don't know about your other external collaborators, but a lot of times we are constantly in our presentations driving those students back to your offices. Please get in touch with career development. Please get in touch with your career specialist. Please make sure you reach out to your PI, reach out to your alumni, blah, 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 blah. I mean, direct them to all of the right people that are affiliated with your graduate school and your programs to make sure that they understand that there's value there that they're missing and they're not tapping into. But other external collaborators can be recruiters from big companies, recruiters from agencies, other career coaches, alumni, again, bringing that one up again. I probably sound like a broken record at this time, but it's really important. So just keep that in mind. I think these are a lot of development opportunities that the schools that do all of these very, very well, those are the schools that you see the students typically having really successful outcomes early on post-graduation. So just keep that in mind that, again, it's not that you have to hire a specific person to be necessarily doing all this. If you don't have a specific career development person, that's okay. Get together with a team of administrators from your graduate school and put one person in charge of alumni, one person in charge of reaching out to recruiters. Divide and conquer that work. You can do it to support those students in getting what they need to get those jobs. So resumes are always interesting. The biggest trend recently with resumes is all of those, graphically designed icons, charts, pie charts, tables upon tables upon tables within a single Word document. They're really pretty and they're great for the tech industry, and they are great for creative industries like marketing, PR, things like that. Beyond that, should not be used at all. They are not ATS friendly. The software can't read them. If the software can't read them, more than likely their resume is not getting seen by a recruiter. So if I have any tips for all of you on resumes today, it is to make sure that they look more contemporary. Add a little bit of color. That's a great way to do that. And look at what colors are associated with different industries, by the way. There are colors that represent industries, if you didn't know that. So look into that. That's a good one. And of course, get away from the Times New Roman font, pick a more contemporary font, but you don't have to have icons and graphs and things like that to show your value. Again, have the most important information in the top half of the first page. And as long as that's there to catch a recruiter's attention and it's aligned well to the job description, then your students are going to be just fine. And I will say that alignment to the job description, I'll touch on that in just a second. I'm going to make myself a note here. But I want to make sure I come back to that because that's an important piece that I want to make sure we all take away as well. So CVs, this is our tip. CVs typically are a look at the past, where a resume is look at the future, basically. And CVs do not have a place for leadership. You want to know what we do about that? Unless the CV is specifically going to a government agency, which has very strict rules, okay, about what they want on the CV and how they want it. If it's not going to a government agency with very strict rules like that, which most of ours are not, most of ours are going to industry or companies, then we add a leadership section on. And we add it on the first page of the CV, because that is automatically going to distinguish your students from the other competition who have no leadership, because a traditional CV does not include leadership. And this is my little plug for so much of what we do is about following the rules. Today's job search is about breaking the rules within the confines of the rules. Okay, I'll say that again. So much of today's job search is breaking the rules while staying within the confines of the rules. So they're still submitting a CV. They're still submitting a CV, maybe that is, 5 pages or less, because that might be the requirement. But nobody said they couldn't put leadership on there. We're breaking the rules. We're adding leadership to get them the edge when they're applying to those opportunities. All right. So keep that in mind. Lots of quote unquote rule breaking going on out there. And we actually encourage that for our clients, as long as it's professional and within the confines of what is required and appropriate for a search. In terms of LinkedIn, a robust LinkedIn profile is an absolute minimum nowadays. So if your students are trying to do a job search without a robust LinkedIn profile, I would highly recommend holding some sort of major meeting and being like, everybody stop what you're doing and do your LinkedIn profile right now. Not only is it their billboard to the outside world, but it is also their two-way search process, okay? So what we're hearing from HR managers is that their recruiters are going and sourcing candidates on LinkedIn before a position is even approved to be posted. So it's going through that approvals process, but there's a lot of red tape, a lot of sign off, and before they can actually get it approved and post it, They're already coming up with their top 10, top 15 list that they're going to invite for interviews before it's even posted on LinkedIn. So if your students don't have all of their keywords and phrases on there that could potentially get them picked for that job, they're missing out on that opportunity before it's even posted. So please, please, please make sure you are driving home the importance of LinkedIn. On top of that, they may have a robust profile, but they're not utilizing LinkedIn. And when I say they're not utilizing it, they're not engaging in it. And that is a perfect branding opportunity, right? If I started putting a post on LinkedIn every day of the month about NAGAP this, NAGAP that, BioGap this, NIGAP that, and shouting out all the different chapters and all of the different NAGAP events. And here's the upcoming summer conference and everything else that's going on. You would start to think, did Holly start working for NAGAP? Is she now working for NAGAP? That's branding, because what I'm putting out there, you're seeing and you're starting to form an opinion about, right? The same thing would happen if I was, a creative writing graduate student, and I'm getting ready to walk away with my master's in creative writing, right? If I start putting everything out there about why creative writing is important for your workplace, why creative writing changes the way people think, how creative writing can do this, blah, 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 which is my expertise area, what do you think employers are going to think? Wow, she really knows the value of creative writing. We should really hire somebody like that, because look at all the wonderful things creative writing can actually do for our team. Okay, so it's very, very much a branding opportunity. We actually come up with an engagement strategy that we give our clients. It's literally 5 slides, and it tells them exactly what to do, on what days, at what point in the month. They put calendar ticklers on their calendar, and then they go in and they do whatever we told them to do. And it literally takes them less than 5-10 minutes each time. And yet it's all about that outside branding and perception, okay? So if they're not engaging, if you're not giving them a strategy to be successful with that, please do that. Again, we have an entire presentation around that. So if that's something you want us to come in and help with, we can absolutely do that. But I think it's something that you all could probably very effectively do as well. So we talked about portfolios. If you are going to encourage your students to do portfolios, which I think you should, I would steer clear of showing them examples of other professionals' portfolios. And the reason for that is they're going to get in their minds that their portfolio should be a certain thing, okay? A portfolio can be so many different things. I mean, they're typically used in teaching and a lot of the creative professions. Nowadays, we're seeing engineers use portfolios, biomedical professionals use portfolios. We're seeing project managers use portfolios. Quality assurance professionals in healthcare use portfolios. So there are a variety of things that you can put into a portfolio as a sample of the type of work that you've done. And I think that's really where you should start with your students is, what do you have already? Maybe it's from some of their coursework. Maybe it's from some of the outside, projects that they've done or internships that they've done. But what are some of the work samples that they have? PowerPoints, Excel, video presentation walkthroughs. The list goes on and on. Case studies. What can they use in their portfolios as a sample of their work to demonstrate the value that they could bring to an employer? That is the whole purpose here. And then not only ask them to put this together in a digital version, and then literally in a 3-ring binder that they could flip through in an interview if the power went out and the battery died and all else failed, have that 3-ring binder they can flip through. Help them perfect using it, right? So, okay, you've got this great portfolio now. How do you use it in your branding? How do you use it in your interview setting? How do you use it in your networking? Walk them through that. And that's kind of where I'm going to tap into really quickly what I was going to, the note that I made to myself. You know, career development is a very ambiguous area for people, and not just graduate students. It is ambiguous for the majority of the population. The reason that my team and I and my business and I have had the success that we have had is because we don't just tell people what to do, we show them. Okay. So if any of you are educators, meaning certified teachers, you have probably been trained in a version of I do, we do, you do, right? So when you're teaching, typically you're standing at your whiteboard and you say, okay, I'm going to show you this mathematic example first. 1 + 1 = 2. Great. We're going to do the next one together. 1 + 2 = how many? Marcus, tell me how much does 1 + 2 equal? And Marcus says it equals 3. I'm like, that's excellent. We just did that one together. Now I want you to do 1 + 3 on your own. Go ahead, take a minute and write the answer down and raise your hand if you have a question for me while you're doing that. Nobody walks students and professionals, quite frankly, through the I do, we do, you do career development process the way that we do. And that is the difference. That is the absolute differentiator for people. They need to see what it is that you're talking about. So while I don't want you to necessarily show them an example of a portfolio, I do want you to kind of have a fake sample that doesn't necessarily have any Excel spreadsheets in it or something. It just says sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, right? And you can kind of show them that there would be several work samples and you would physically walk somebody through that, right? Also, little things that somebody might say, hey, I'm applying for this job, but I don't know how to tailor my resume to it. Show them. Don't just say, well, we'll take some keywords and phrases from here and plug those in. They could take all the wrong keywords and phrases. Show them how to identify the right keywords and phrases that would actually matter to that employer, and then plug those in where the synonyms are or the gaps are in their resume. Okay, so little things like that, showing them, not just telling them, is super, super important. And I hope that you will make an effort to do that, because that will be a huge differentiator in preparing those students for the market. And I have that on this slide too. But I also have, particularly with the interview preparation, more direct feedback. I think a lot of times the clients that we work with have probably been told some of the feedback that we're giving them, but they're told in a very indirect, or it's so sandwiched they didn't really get the message. And we do try to sandwich. We're not necessarily like totally trying to go and tear people down and then build them back up. But we do very much see it as our job. And if you are saying something that is not working to your advantage, or if you're doing something that's not working to your advantage, you need to stop. And it is our job to help you stop. Otherwise, you're not going to get a job. I'll give you an example. I had a client recently who, he went into a job. It was the wrong fit for him. It was what we would define as a hostile work environment. He was literally being verbally abused in the workplace. And it was mentally and emotionally starting to take its toll on him. And I had not met with him in a video call in almost 6 months. And I finally ended up on a video call with him because we redid his resume and we're like, let's get you out of here. You've been in this job for 6 months. It's time to hit the market again and get you out of there. And when we got on the video call, he literally had developed nervous tics with his body language because he was so stressed. And interestingly enough, they were very distracting. It made me physically nervous and emotionally nervous when I was seeing him. And so I had to have a very direct conversation with him. Do you know you keep touching your eyes? Do you know you keep doing this? And like kind of pointing out to him what was physically happening as a result of these nervous tics that he developed. And sure enough, he then started to catch himself throughout the rest of the coaching session. And by the end, he said, I had no idea I was doing this. I bet I've been doing this for a long time. Thank you for pointing it out. And he was able to work on it between the time that I met with him and his interview 3 days later. And he was able to pull off the interview without doing the nervous tics. So little things like that, you have to give direct feedback on. So please make sure that you are doing that. Of course, always be kind. And certainly make it productive, but it is very much something that you have to do to make sure people get to where they need to get. And it's not always physical stuff. A lot of times it's what they're saying or what they're not saying, quite frankly. Helping them define their value. People don't know what their selling points are. Everybody has selling points. You know, Nike can sell itself differently than Under Armour. I can sell myself differently from Marcus. Okay, even if we were applying for the same job, we are not the same person, yet we have both worked in GEM. So how would I sell myself differently in an interview, and how would Marcus sell himself differently? So think about how do you help your students define what makes them unique and what is the value that they bring to an employer. We have exercises that we have our clients do around that, and then we literally help them rewrite them because they're typically horrible by the time they get to us. So try coming up with something like that if you don't have something in place for that. Overall, you know, I've seen a lot of schools really focusing on more of a team approach and engaging outside resources. And we talked about earlier those recruiters and executive coaches. When you are building your teams, this is a really great place to look to. You know, I think for years, the mentality, particularly for career development, was career counseling. And yes, a lot of what we do is counseling people through these processes. And our LPCs are still very much our go-to hires. But diversifying your teams a lot by bringing in those recruiters, those executive coaches, or other career development specialists who have industry experience outside of higher ed, and who may not have a traditional counseling or coaching background, can be a huge value add to your teams in providing sort of that hiring manager employer perspective to your students and alumni. Also, schools who are engaging alumni are really, really doing a great job. And we recently have noticed an uptick in different career development centers and schools applying for grants specifically for career development. And I know I just did one recently with the University of Pittsburgh. They applied for a grant from the Boroughs Welcome Fund specifically to host a career club. And this career club meets multiple times a month. It's a select group of students who are all coming up on graduation soon. And it's that check, 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 everything that they're going to need in order to get ready for graduation. And it is all grant funded. So look at, there are opportunities out there. Even within a lot of the existing grants that your graduate schools apply for traditionally, there is typically a career development section. More than likely, your school is not maxing out the financial capability that they could potentially get from that career development aspect. So look at how you might be able to come up with some suggested programs, put that in the next renewal or the next application, and see if you can get some more funding from career development that way. And then, of course, we can help if you wanted us to come and look at your overall strategy and figure out where you might have some gaps and where you could plug in new things based on, the confines and restraints of your school. We would be happy to do that. We can provide workshops and webinars. We can do speaking engagements. We can do coaching, resume reviews, all of that wonderful stuff. And I have been told by the schools that we work with that we have very friendly pricing for our graduate school partners. So something to keep in mind as well. But those were the things that I wanted to touch on today. Does anybody have any questions for me based on that information?
That was great, Holly. We don't have any questions right at the moment that have come in, but if you have any, please enter them in the questions box. I've jotted down a few, so I'm happy to throw a few your way, Holly.
Go for it.
Given that jobs are kind of pivoting now to some level of remote, some are either going to be fully remote, some are hybrid, some have just kind of some general mix that's kind of a loose definition. How do you suggest that we prepare our students for that? I mean, because I talk to students that are very much focused on a traditional go to work in the office kind of a setup, and then they express apprehension about a remote. And then there's other people that are more than welcoming to the remote option and don't want to go to the office. So how are you preparing people who might have apprehension one way or the other?
I think it's a matter of understanding that there are advantages to both. And I think people, if their apprehension is real enough that they are fearful of going into a workplace, I think that they have to factor that into their job search strategy, and maybe they should only be considering, remote opportunities and not opportunities where they're physically, either sometimes or all the time going to a physical work location on site. I will say too, from the employer side, the feedback that we have gotten throughout the pandemic and everybody suddenly shifting to remote is the thing that slipped through the cracks was employee onboarding and engagement. So for new hires, it is particularly difficult to plug in remotely because most businesses did not have a plan to onboard and engage people remotely. So because those programs aren't in place the way that they were on site, yes, they're still getting their access to their IT and all of that wonderful stuff, but developing relationships with the rest of your team and getting to know the players and getting that quote unquote face time with leadership that you might be looking for, more than likely new hires are going to have to do some work on their own. They're going to have to be bold. They're going to have to reach out and set up those 15-minute Zoom calls to get to know people a little bit more personally and establish those relationships, because that may not be coming from the top down.
Yeah, and given that a lot of our folks are admissions, or at least kind of front end folks, what recommendations do you have for those of us who might have our hands a little bit in the career side, but maybe doing outcomes reporting on our own like we are and things like that? What roles can we play that might expand and support this effort through the entire life cycle rather than just at the front?
Absolutely. So, I touched on the fact that students really are looking for, what am I going to be able to do with this? Am I going to get a job after I get this degree? And so if you don't have somebody within your graduate school already tracking those outcomes, take it upon yourself. Start tracking that information. Start slowly pulling it together. I know when I worked in my position at Baylor, we were very decentralized, and I was very much responsible for tracking down alumni via LinkedIn and figuring out if they had moved. And the reality was I had to do that because then we had to turn around and report it on different grants, right? So again, if you start to track that information, or you can get a hold of that information, that can not only be really valuable information for sharing with prospective new students to say, hey, look, 60% of our students were employed before they graduated or within a month of graduation, or whatever it is that you're going to track. But also to then be able to turn around and use that data, use that information to then apply for more funding to continue to support these initiatives going forward. I think that's a great thing that you can do on the front end for sure. Also, like I said, many schools have a lot of these resources in place, but a lot of times our admissions professionals don't necessarily know about them. So connecting with either the office or the person who's in charge of all this information and being aware of what it is that you are offering so that you can turn around and use that as selling points to prospective students, I would highly encourage that you do that.
And I'll throw one more to you. At what point do we pick up the phone and call you? Where do we say, like, we need Holly? Because, we've got our Center for Professional Development on campus, and they're largely undergraduate focused. But at what point, whether it be undergraduate or graduate or where do you jump in, and where do we say that the added value is that we must engage with somebody outside?
So there's a few different reasons that people reach out to us from graduate schools. One, it's because we can tailor a specific presentation to your specific school or programs. So a lot of times we get brought in by very technical areas, Carnegie Mellon's, MBA programs in like data analytics, right? We tailored presentations specifically towards those data analytics graduate students who would then be going on to specific types of jobs within data analytics, right? So we will tailor things in a way, and we have a perspective on the hiring market to be able to do so that career development centers don't necessarily have. So bringing that angle in, a lot of times there just isn't somebody with that expertise, or they feel like career development centers or professionals feel like they're saying the same thing over and over again, but the students still aren't doing it. Bringing in a third-party expert can open their eyes and somehow establish a trust factor to get them to get that message finally, right? And then another reason people bring us in is sometimes they realize they're coming up on the end of their grant or their budget and they haven't spent their money. And so then they go ahead and say, hey, this would be nice to offer this programming to our students. So something that you don't have either in terms of programming or expertise, more tailored presentations, and then of course, excess money in the budget. You want to use it so you don't lose it.
Great. I did see a question came in. I want to make sure we get it in. How often are you seeing individual graduate programs employ their own employment market prep programming?
So great point. At the program level, not at most schools, okay? At the school level, however, not the university or college level, but the specific school, like the School of Medicine or the School of Architecture or something like that. Yes, we will see the schools then investing in their own sort of employment market prep or career development prep person. That is becoming more common. The reality is that the understanding of transferable skills and the wide array of opportunities that students could potentially go to is so vast that having an expert like that on hand can be really, really helpful. If you can't necessarily afford your own person, full-time person, then looking at engaging us for, like 6 presentations a year, touching on different areas, doing some sort of career club like PIT, or bringing in multiple presenters throughout the year, whether it's us and alumni and whoever else, that can be a great way to, even though you may not have a budget for a full-time person, getting some of that outside expertise in without necessarily paying for a full-time person.
And we have another question that we might as well, if you have a couple of minutes, Holly, we'll just finish one more out here. Okay. They're expressing that there's some challenges even with bringing in a third party, and I guess we all run into this, with getting buy-in with students until it's too late and they're walking the stage and then they're panicking. So do you have any suggestions on how to get students buy-in earlier?
So where we've seen it be most successful is there has to be a cohesive narrative from the time that they walk through the door to the time that they leave. There has to be a narrative on this is how we're here to support, and here's what's expected of you because we provide these things. And here are the specific checkpoints in which we're going to provide these things. And you are expected to check in at that point, right? Is it necessarily a specific graduation requirement? No, but kind of pitching it as if it almost is, getting those advisors and mentors engaged, getting faculty engaged with it. That can be really, really helpful in getting those students engaged in that process. Also, doing it at a time when it's convenient for them can be really, really helpful too. So running some surveys, on SurveyMonkey or something like that, and figuring out when they would plan to attend the most. And now that in-person meetings are starting to resume in a lot of places, we all know the free lunch is always a good driver. So again, if you have money in the budget to provide the free lunch, then definitely do that, because that can solidify attendance in a lot of things.
Well, thank you so much, Holly. I know we went a few minutes over, but appreciate everybody coming, and this was some really great content. We'd love to share it out. So we will send it to all the attendees, the link for that, and feel free to share it widely. And Holly, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, Marcus. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.